Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to this episode of Test Those Breasts. I am your host, Jamie Vaughn. And today I am honored and excited to have therapist Eddie Enever on my podcast episode as my guest. Eddie is someone I met a year ago, actually. He was very instrumental in pulling me out of the deep, dark throes of darkness, and we are still in touch to this day. So, Eddie is passionate about living a life full of meaning and purpose by authentically relating and sharing his knowledge with those who are inspired to experience healing, greater happiness, and well being in their lives. He has had his fair share of ups and downs in life. He's battled cancer and survived not once, but three times. He has struggled with anxiety and depression, experienced a marriage breakup, and financial demise. He not only survived, but now thrives living a life full of deep connection, meaning, and purpose. Eddie's personal mission is to raise awareness about the impact that stress can have on all of the aspects of our lives. He is committed to educating and empowering individuals and their families with skills to understand and overcome the effects of stress and trauma so they can experience their fullest potential. As an experienced naturopath, his special area of interest is in cancer and chronic disease coaching. He teaches meditation and breath work. He founded the CSRT, the Cold Stress Resilience Training, where he shares tools to deal with stress and build resilience in an ice bath. After working with thousands of clients in his role as a health professional, he has developed a unique way of seeing past the facades, drawing out blockages, perceptions, and limiting belief systems, and empowering his patients to discover their own unique gifts, talents, and power to change their lives. On July 13th, 2022, I was really having a difficult time. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the scary things that were about to happen, and I knew that I needed to find someone who could help me. So I started to look around Facebook and other places for someone who could do just that. And I had Eddie Enever fall on my lap, and I reached out to him in the middle of the night. It was July 13th, and here is what I said. Hello, Eddie. My name is Jamie Vaughn, and I live in Reno, Nevada, in the United States. I was just diagnosed with breast cancer, and I will be starting my chemotherapy treatment on Monday, July 18. I'm absolutely terrified. I've been advised not to Google information, so I haven't at all, but I did run across your video from August of 2020 on Facebook, and it really spoke to me. I'm reaching out to find out how I can incorporate your services with my journey. I'm having a lot of what seems to be psychological issues, and I can't seem to come to terms with what is about to happen. It has been a whirlwind month of doctor's appointments, tests, etc., and I'm absolutely reeling with emotion. I need to have some serious mindfulness techniques and anything else that would be beneficial. If you are still taking on any people like me, can you please let me know and how I can connect with you? Thank you so much, Jamie. He wrote back to me very quickly. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for reaching out. I definitely have a skillet that could help you. Here's a link to my ebook on my approach to cancer care. This will give you an idea of my approach. In the psychological sphere, some compassionate inquiry sessions for you would be helpful to manage what is coming up for you. Have a read of the ebook first and let me know how you want to proceed. You've got this. So with that, I am so excited to have Eddie with me. All right. Well, welcome, Eddie, to Test Those Breasts podcast. I'm really happy to have you here today. I do want to let the audience know that we are excited that this might be working because we've tried several times to get this to work. You are in Perth, Australia, right?
I am, yep.
And sometimes we have connection issues. And so we were determined to make it work. I want to tell my audience one of the reasons I wanted to interview Eddie is because he was an instrumental part in my getting over and out of the darkness back in July after I'd found out about my breast cancer diagnosis. I was in a very deep, dark, scary place, and it was like a different dimension. And I scared myself. I really did. And I realized one night when I was sleeping and I was waking up in the middle of the night thinking about things, I realized that if I was going to allow myself to stay in that darkness, that it was not going to fare well. I was not going to get through the cancer successfully. And I realized that I needed to get some help so that I could change the narrative of how this whole thing was going to go down. And I started looking around on social media, Facebook in particular, for anyone that could give me something to help me get through this. And I found Eddie. I found his profile and read a lot of things about Eddie and listened to some of his videos. And I reached out to Eddie immediately. I really honestly, Eddie, think it was in the middle of the night that I reached out to you. And that would have been your like next day. And I told you who I was. I explained my situation, and you were so quick to get back to me and help me. And we eventually got on Zoom 2 times right after I started my chemo. And I had some major chemo brain going on. And you gave me some great advice on nutrition and mental health and things that I could do to help me get through this whole process. And the ebooks that I read that you sent to me were so profound to me. I learned so much, and I just appreciate you more than you'll probably ever know. But I also know that you are a 3-time cancer survivor, and you had to figure out your own life and how you were going to get through cancer. So welcome. And I just would really like you to share briefly your story about your cancer and how you were able to maneuver that and get through that and still be cancer free to this day.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on. Third time's a charm. We got the tech to work, which is, well, fingers crossed, we've got the tech to work, but it's amazing. But also, well done to you. Cancer's a huge thing, and cures don't come easy, and it takes a lot of effort and dedication and huge changes. And all kudos to you for doing that. So, just wanted to make sure that to pump you up as well.
Thank you.
But my story is an interesting one. 2013, I got diagnosed. It was 10 days before Christmas. So it wasn't the best Christmas present, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was 33 at the time. So I was in the prime of my life. I had a 2.5-year-old son and a pregnant wife. At that point in my life, I had a business. It was a big health center with 15 practitioners, a yoga hall, a cafe, a shop. And I'd been gifted that business, which is pretty crazy. It was a 10-year-old existing business, and I got given it for free, which was an amazing opportunity. And I was only young and I didn't know anything about business whatsoever, but I knew how to work hard. So I did that. I worked hard in this business, and I saw it as an opportunity to set the family up. So I put everything into it, and very soon figured out that I had no idea what I was doing. But when things weren't working, I did what I knew what I could do, which was to work hard. So I worked harder again. And a lot of stress was starting to build in my life around managing, obviously, 15 practitioners and all the hats that you wear when you're a business owner. For the business owners out there, they know what that's like. You can become a little bit of a jack of all trade, master of none. You can be bookkeeping one moment. You can be managing conflict with practitioners and another one. You can be marketing. You can be consulting yourself, mowing lawns, scrubbing toilet. God, so
Yeah.
many roles that I had. And the stress was very high, but my personality at the time was I'd like to hide that stress away from the world. So I'd internalize that stress and suck that down behind this big, cool, calm, collected demeanor. Everyone would say, wow, look at you. Look how calm you are. Cool as a cucumber. Yet I'd be thinking inside of myself, well, you should look at what's going on inside. So I hid it away from the world, and the stress was building over quite a few years. And I think it just culminated in this diagnosis 10 days before Christmas. Life came crashing down in an instant. You hear those words, I'm sorry, it's this cancer. And that C word has so much oomph to it, doesn't it? It's got so much emotion wrapped up in the C words. That was a pretty huge thing at 33 to have to handle, being met with mortality. And so the next 2 years, I underwent treatment. Unfortunately, I had 3 relapses over those 2 years. So I was clinically clear of cancer 3 times. The scans were clear, the blood tests were clear, yet clearly I wasn't clear because 6 months later, the first time I had relapsed and then went through treatment again and I was clinically clear again. But 3 months later, this time it popped back and it happened one more time. So it wasn't being fully cleared. And it was at that sort of point where things weren't working and my oncologist was scratching his head. He didn't know what to do at that point because I had testicular cancer. So if you can get it, testicular cancer, it is the most treatable cancer to be diagnosed with. It's got a very high success rate with your first line of treatment. So your first lot of treatment has a cure rate of anywhere between 96 and 98%. So it's highly treatable. People shouldn't be getting relapses. They shouldn't be dying from testicular cancer. Yet here I was 2 years later, 3 relapses under my belt and chemo-resistant oncologists going, we don't know what to do. There's literally not enough data on the planet about people who get this unwell with this sort of cancer. We really actually don't know what to do. And it was at that point I really had to take a step back and go, what the hell is going on here? You know, I was a health professional. I knew how to support cancer. I was doing all the diet and the things. I was following doctor's orders. I was doing the right treatments. And yet here I was in this really very, very unwell state. You know, my worst, I had a 9 centimeter by 8 centimeter by 3 centimeter tumor in my abdomen, which was pushing my bowel up against my abdominal wall. I had a couple tumors in my chest, up under my collarbone, one in my neck and one in my lung. So it was pretty riddled with cancer and it was incredibly aggressive and not responding. So it was growing incredibly fast. And I had to really take a step back and just go, what am I missing here? I'm doing what I've been told to do. I'm supporting that. It doesn't make sense. And there was a mic drop moment, if you want to call that, or a light bulb moment at one point where I realized I'd missed a point. I'd been focusing so much on what was wrong with me. What do I need to treat? How do I inject more healing into this? More therapies, more diet, more nutrition, more supplements, more whatever, medicines. And that wasn't the issue. The issue was the environment that I was trying to get well within. So trying to maintain that business and those stress levels and hiding away that stress from the world was a major issue. And my environment wasn't conducive to the outcome that I was seeking, that I was desiring, and it was getting in the way. So I was actually roadblocking my path to healing. And it was quite a profound moment for me to realize, oh shit, I missed the point. It's not what I'm doing is the problem. It's the way that I'm doing it is the problem. I had to make some really big changes to my life. We had to sell a business. That was very hard to do. It was something that I'd been gifted, which was amazing. And then I'd put so much energy into it. And that business gave me so much affirmation, not affirmation, that's the wrong word, validation for my existence and my career because I was young and there was a lot wrapped up in it. I didn't want to drop that, but I had to. It was a huge source of stress and I just couldn't get well within that stress. So I had to sell that, which was pretty hard to do. We sold a house, a young family, and so we were trying to get our own home, paying that off. So we had to sell that and downsize things to get my stress levels from very high to low in a very quick amount of time. So that was very important. I also chose to go overseas at that point and do some overseas treatment. And I chose to do some hypothermia, which is a heat treatment where you raise your body temperature up very high to a fever, essentially. It's fever therapy. So my oral temperature would be 40 degrees Celsius in Australia. So we use Celsius down here. So that's not fun. A 40-degree fever is not a walk in the park. It's not fun at all. And you'd be in these little hypothermia machines, which would essentially bake you like a cooked chicken and raise your body temperature up to that sort of level. And you'd maintain that for as close to 30, 40, 60 minutes if you can. So I was doing that for 8 weeks, 3 times a week, plus a whole heap of localized hypothermia just to the tumor sites. And my hope was that I would go over there and I would bake these cancer tumors out of me. Now, that wasn't the case. By the end of those 8 weeks, everything had tripled in size. I was very unwell. I'd lost a lot of weight. I looked pretty rough. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'7", believe it or not. And I usually weigh in and around about 120 kilos is my sort of running weight. When I was at my worst, I think I was down at 84 kilos. So it was basically 40 kilos off my frame, which is a lot. 84 kilos and 6'7" is like a beanpole. And I was really quite on my, so I came back to Australia and that's when I had to do my last lot of treatment. My oncologist was like, mate, things are pretty dire here. We need to act quickly. And so I underwent my last lot of chemotherapy. And this time the cancer just melted away. It disappeared so quickly. My oncologist was absolutely flabbergasted. jaw was literally on the ground. And I was just like, what's going on here? Why is it disappearing so quickly? And the only thing that he can come up with, which was the hypothermia, has sensitized your cancer so much to these treatments. It's just literally like putting a hot knife through butter. It's just melting these things away. And if you consult the literature, the scientific literature, there's a huge amount of body of evidence to show that is the actual case. Hypothermia sensitizes cancer to treatments like radiotherapy and also chemotherapy. And so for me, there was a combination of things that got me well. There was obviously me getting my environment conducive to the outcome that I desired, so making some big changes. There was the right chemotherapy regime, and also there was the hypothermia. And I think if I was to do any one of those in isolation, probably wouldn't have worked for me. But that combination was the synergy of that was what was needed to get myself well. And that was 7 years ago now, and I've been cancer-free ever since.
Wow.
So that's
Very, very
basically
interesting.
the journey, or insight into the journey. There's so much more to it, but could talk for days on this stuff.
Boy, that took a lot for you. I'm so glad that you are cancer free and you have really used your story to help other people like me. And you've got quite a few clients I know, and your videos are really fun to watch. One of the things that you mentioned for your journey is that the environment that you were around, and you were just very stressed. You had a lot of things going on. And it was very heartbreaking for you to have to sell that business because it was your identity, right? It was your purpose and or
Mm,
whatever.
yeah.
That was very similar to me. And I really didn't understand that probably until just this last February, when I was getting into my healing process. I became cancer free in December, but then I had a thymoma tumor that they had to remove in January because it was causing this rare anemia that I have that I'm on meds for. But around February, I started realizing that I didn't feel like I had a purpose or any significance. And it dawned on me that because when I got cancer, it was June 11 of last year, and it was literally 1 week after I retired from the school district. Now, working for the school district was incredibly stressful. There's a lot of things that are going on in school districts around the world, I know, and it's very stressful for teachers and administrators. And we have overloaded classrooms and behavior problems and things like that. But it was what I knew. It was my significance. It was my purpose. It was everything that I had been doing for 20 years. And then I also had a business on the side. I had started a podcast. I am very social. I had a million things on my calendar. And then I realized that June 11, when I found out I had cancer, everything was cut off, like completely cut off. And from there forward, my focus was cancer. But when you and I spoke last July, I told you what had been going on since October of 2019. My mother passed away. It just absolutely knocked me to the ground like no one's business. The pandemic hit. I was carrying my dad's grief and my own grief. I lost one of my very best friends during the pandemic. She just decided that she didn't want to be friends with me anymore. So she left me right in the middle of my grieving my mom. I mean, it was just very difficult for me. And then the following December, my father-in-law died of COVID in the hospital. Less than a year later, in October of 2021, my other father-in-law passed away. And so my husband and I have had a lot of grief and trauma and things that have happened since my mother died in October of 2019. And all of this while working in the school district, running a business, doing a podcast, doing all this stuff. And then you had said something to me that was very profound. You said that it was like this perfect storm. Like a lot of people don't even know what cancer is. And it creates this perfect storm for cancer to strike you. And I feel, and I'll never know whether it was actually the case that was mine, but I feel like it is that environment, that stress and trauma may have led to my cancer. What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a common finding when you get to counsel hundreds of cancer patients, and this is also in the literature for the preceding 2 years or so before a diagnosis, many of these people that are diagnosed go through really heavy periods of their life with things like what you've described, with losses in the family or marriage issues or a whole host of things. Everyone's got a different story and biography, but that it's very commonly reported. Yeah, a lot of people will think that cancer just pops up out of the blue overnight, and it doesn't. It takes somewhere between, for most cancers, there's some really aggressive ones that will pop up very quickly, and we're starting to see these turbo cancers since COVID that are popping up, which are very aggressive, very fast. But for the vast majority of cancers, it takes 2 to 5 years for that cancer to manifest in the body. What's life been like in those 2 to 5 years for people? Now, that's what creating that environment, that perfect storm to come together to help create this dysfunctional cell, which then starts to divide. And then eventually, after those 2 to 5 years, a lump and a bump gets found. Either you feel it on a breast exam or it comes up in a chest x-ray or something like that. So, yeah, it's a really common finding. And the impact of trauma and stress on chronic disease, not just cancer, but autoimmunities and things. There's a bit of research around that, on the correlations and the connections between these. And the more, of these adverse events that you've had in your life, the higher the risk of chronic diseases, including cancer. So it plays a huge role, and it's very important. Then we want to go in and we've got to try to heal the cancer. We've also got to look at all the stuff that's happened that's helped to create it as well, rather than try to medicate the thing away. It's so easy for us to do that. And I think we're so programmed with this over-the-counter mentality. If you've got an issue, you go to the pharmacy or the drugstore and you get your little medicine that helps to medicate it, and so you can get on with your life. Whereas I think for a lot of cancer patients, it's a little bit deeper than that. Yes, we do need to treat the flesh and bones and the lumps and bumps that we may have, but we've also got to really reflect on the deeper philosophical question of, what does this diagnosis mean in the context of my life? Like, why? It's so easy to focus on the what, which is the biology and how do we treat this, and the chemo and the diet and the this and the that. But to actually sit back and just go, oh, what does this really mean? Like, why me? What's caused this? More than just environmental toxins and things like that. Like, what does this mean in the context of my life? It's a really deep question for people to contemplate at some stage of the journey. It can be pretty hard to swallow right at the start when you're diagnosed. And honestly, that question and that deep dive into that can wait. We've got to get the flesh and bones disease under control first with the treatments, the diets, and all the other things, the integrative approach. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to cancer. It's not just a physical disease. Anyone that's had it, you would be able to attest to this. It's so many layers to it. We've got the mental and the emotional and the spiritual side. Like, why me? They've been met with mortality. It's pretty confronting.
Right. And unfortunately, you don't really get that until you actually go through it. And it's really hard for other people to understand. And I would
Yeah.
never I want everybody to not have to go through it, but I know how many people do. So what do you suggest then? Because it occurs to me that I have a lot of really busy friends. I have a lot of friends that are stressed and they can't just up and leave their job. They've got a family, they've got whatever. And I know that sometimes people are able to do certain things, but what do you suggest? I know we have a whole thing of questions, and I love to have this podcast very conversational. If
Yeah,
something comes up, I'm going to ask you, right? So,
totally.
what do you suggest that people do in a situation when they know that they're stressed, they know that their
Mhm.
environment is very stressful, and not end up getting some sort of a disease, illness, or
Yeah,
whatever?
yeah,
What can they do during
yeah,
that time to try to keep
yeah.
themselves healthy?
There's a lot they can do. One, obviously, if possible, can we decrease our total stress load? So in medicine, they have a name for the total stress load that's on your body and the wear and tear that it's causing to you. They call this allostatic load. Okay. So I quite often, when I'm doing my workshops or talking with people, I get people to imagine an industrial set of scales in front of them with a basket on there. And we do a little bit of a life audit. Let's have a look at your physical life or your physical health. How much stress have we got there? Are you sleeping well? Like, what's going on? Pop it into the basket, your mental, emotional life, what stress we got there, pop that in there. Social life, financial life, familial life, career. We look at all the different levels of health in our life and we look at our stresses and we pop it in the basket. And it's a little exercise. It just gets us to appreciate maybe how much of an allostatic load we have. What does that basket full of your stress actually weigh? Because that's weighing on your system. with stress. There's chemistry to stress. You've got adrenaline, you've got cortisol, you've got these inflammatory cytokines, which are like inflammation chemicals floating through your veins when you're in this stress response. And if you've got a very high stress response, that's floating through 24/7. So ideally, we'd like to see what have we got in that basket, and is there anything that doesn't belong in there? Are we taking on too much stress? Are there stresses in our life that we can change, that we can decrease? Sometimes there is, but sometimes there's not. If we're diagnosed, we're diagnosed. We can't change that in a hurry. Our career that we may have spent a decade or 2 decades on, we can't change that in a hurry. Our mortgage, we can't sell the home. So we can have these stresses, but can we now maybe not focus on lowering the stress, but maybe the way that we interact with our stresses can change. Okay. And that's an inside job, inside of us. So our nervous system, how resilient is our nervous system? Do we understand how that works? Can we regulate our nervous system? Do we know how to pull ourselves out of stress? Everyone out there are pros with stress because we're all under so much stress, aren't we? So we're very good at getting into stress and we're not so good at getting out of stress. And that's a skill. That's a skill set. And so you can learn that. And that can be as simple as learning how to breathe in a more controlled, slower way. Because when you're stressed, your breath upregulates to fight or flight, to run away from tigers or fight tigers back in the day. So your breath will go very short, sharp, and shallow. The stress breath, I call it. And so can we notice when our breath is going on us in these stressful moments, and can we regulate that breath down and start to go longer and slower? So 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. That'll take your breath rate down to 6 breaths a minute, which is a really healthy, regulated breath rate. When you're stressed, you're probably breathing 15, 20 breaths a minute, which puts a lot of load on the body for good reason. But it's just the problem is we're surrounded by these metaphorical tigers, our stresses, tigers in disguise, and our allostatic loads are too high. So 1, can we bring it down? 2, can we interact with it differently? Sometimes we have to seek some help as well, maybe a therapist or a psychologist, something like that, to understand, why do I stress the way that I do? Like, why does something that stresses me out not stress you out? Yeah. And so there's deeper aspects to stress as well. It's just like, okay, well, why do I do what I do? How did I become me? And why do I perceive the world in the way that I do? And why do these things stress me when they don't seem to stress Joe Blow over there? So that's another aspect we can start to work on ourselves and understand ourselves, our perceptions. And this is all based on our earliest childhood experiences and the homes we were brought up and the dynamics within the family constellation. When we can bring some understanding to that, we can bring awareness, and then with that we have some choice, and sometimes we can spot what's happening and we can interrupt the trigger so we don't get into our stress response. So that's another thing that we can do that doesn't involve a medicine or a herb or something like that. And you can absolutely use things like that too. Herbal medicines are beautiful adjunct to stress and our nervous system. There's herbs that beautifully support the nervous system and the adrenal glands, all interrelated with the stress response. There's little gadgets out there that you can wear that help to tone your vagus nerve, which is this major calming nerve in the body that pulls us out of stress. And the more that we can nourish that and use these gadgets and our self-care techniques of breathing and meditation, mindfulness and relaxation techniques, we start to build our capacity to pull ourselves out of stress. Does that make sense?
Ooh, yes, it does. It
Yeah.
absolutely does. And one of the things that we do in our school district, and I know a lot of school districts do, is we really started incorporating that mindful breathing even for our students. So, especially like I taught middle school and high school, but middle school in particular, they get very, very anxious and wound up. And so they come in and after lunch and they're all wound up, or in the morning, they're all wound up. And so we would implement these breathing. And I used to do that right along with them. So I
Yeah.
know the power of mindful breathing and
Yeah.
how to breathe and things like that. But when you talk about even like nutrition, things that we eat during the day, I know that nutrition can really play a number on our stress level and our gut, our adrenal glands and gut and all of that. But the stress part, I remember my calendar used to be super, super full. And I think this can probably go really nicely into looking at our calendar and looking at what's on there that really isn't serving us, or it
Mm.
may just be way too much, and learning how to say no to things, because I really had to learn how to say, no, I can't meet with you guys after school or after work or whatever. But at the same time, we always try to figure out a way to have a work social balance life, being able
Yeah,
to work, but also being able to unwind with your friends or family or whatever. But being able to sit down and look at those events that are on your calendar and what it is that you can take off of that calendar to be able to serve you better.
definitely. And life's got a way of just injecting lots of busyness into it, doesn't it? It's a busy life, this modern life, and there are lots of things to do. But I think also it's a little bit of a symptom of this sick society that we live in, which is judged on its busyness. It's almost like people wear their busyness like a little bit of a badge of honor because you're judged by your productivity. Yeah. It's a symptom of sort of this capital. Yeah, it's an important question to ponder, and it can be a really tricky one too. Life demands a lot of us. First thing I would say to that would be maybe understanding, why do I do this? Why am I packing my life full? Why can't I say no? Really big questions. Because quite often underneath that can be some psychological factors that go way, way back. That inability to say no, that people pleasing mentality, which, to be honest, in cancer is actually a really quite common personality trait that's been studied for quite a few decades now. This nice person condition, this nice person that I'll do everything above and beyond to help everyone and put myself last. So we have to ask ourselves, what's driving that? Where's that come from? That can be all the way back from childhood stuff. And it might be high expectations were put on us, or it might have been a dysfunctional home where poor little us as a child became responsible for managing the emotions of the household. And so we had to keep the peace, and we would do that. And within that, we lost our sort of voice to say no and our ability to create boundaries. So that's obviously pretty deep stuff. You typically need a therapist or someone to help you navigate and untangle that stuff. But that's a very worthwhile journey to do that, because, that shows up in every area of your life, these sort of behavioral traits, which, like I said, are really common in cancer. There's a cancer-prone personality type, a type of person that tends to get cancer, and they call cancer the nice person disease. People too nice for their own good, and unfortunately it becomes a detriment to them. These people are super nice. They are the caretakers of the world. They really struggle to say no. They go above and beyond, and they drink last from that cup. They also tend to internalize that stress, those emotions. They don't show it to the world. They sort of hide it away. So I'll take that, and I'll take yours as well. It's very much the empath, if you want to use that terminology, these people that feel too much and they feel other people's stuff and they want to help everyone to their own detriment. So that's a pretty important thing to unpack if that's going on for you. And quite honestly, so many of my patients tick these boxes. I certainly did, in a big way. And it makes me laugh because I have quite a few people quite often will say within this conversation, when I'm having this type of conversation with people, they look at me and they're like, "Are you psychic?" And it always
Really?
makes me laugh because yeah, always makes me laugh. It's just, I wish. No, I'm not. I just know who I'm talking to here. I'm talking to me. You're just me living a different life, and I know what's going on for you. So it's quite a funny thing that happens very frequently, actually. But that's a really important thing to explore. Not what we do. Why do we do what we do? That can be really important, because these behavioral traits will show up in every area of your life, whether it's career or your healing journey or your relationships or your parenting or finances, everywhere.
I feel like you're a psychic
Excuse me.
because seriously, that is so me. Now I know.
It
Back
hits the
into
spot
that.
probably a good 85 to 90% of the time. So
Yeah, I have friends. Like I have one of my very best friends has cancer right now, and that fits the bill so much for
yeah,
her.
yeah.
And that is totally me too. And I remember back in 2016, I got really sick and I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Well, it turned out that I had hypothyroidism and it turned like this Hashimoto's. And they talked about the people who take on too much stress and I remember having to take
Yeah.
things off of my plate, but of course I got right back on the horse and kept on doing
Mm.
so many things. And so you mentioned something about seeking therapy and possibly helping you create boundaries. And that is definitely one thing that I have learned this year is to speak my mind, speak up
Mm.
and create boundaries. And not everybody
Yeah.
loves those boundaries, Eddie.
Uh,
I have
Not when
found.
you've been wearing a certain hat for most of your life. And then you go,
Yeah.
I don't like the fit of this hat anymore. And you go, this is this non-boundary expressing hat. I'm going to take that off. I'm going to put this boundary expressing hat on. that usually causes a little bit of a stir, especially within family
Okay.
dynamic as well. And sometimes relationships too. It's just like, who is this person? Now, you don't stand up for yourself. You usually do everything for the family unit. But it's such an important thing for the cancer patient to do. I think it extends beyond cancer. It's called the cancer prone personality, or the C type behavioral traits is what they call it, or the C type personality. But I think that C actually doesn't just stand for cancer, it stands for chronic disease. So the autoimmunities like the Hashimoto's and
Mhm.
psoriasis and the MSs and all these things, because these people all have a very similar behavioral traits and stress coping strategies. And a really big part of it is that repression of emotion. So losing that authentic voice, which happened a long time ago, to suppress that down. And then the problem with that is you become a little bit of a doormat for life,
Mhm.
and you do drink last from that cup, and your body and your heart and your mind, it doesn't do well on dregs from the cup. Yeah. You got to feed yourself first. If the plane's going down, you put your mask on first, don't you, before you pop it on anyone else? And it
Right.
can be hard, and in particular for women, it's very hard because I think societally, the woman is very much usually in more traditional sort of relationships can be the real rock of the family, like that center point, and they tend to be expected of them to put themselves last. And you look at the rates of breast cancer, and it's just massive. And
Mhm.
so there's really powerful lessons for everyone, men as well, on can we reestablish that authentic connection to be able to express ourselves well with our emotions and our stress, to express it out of the body, and also put up these boundaries, because it's very hard for the cancer prone personality type to do that, but
Right.
also so essential for them.
Yeah. And so, to my audience, if you missed that, if you need to go back and listen to what Eddie just said, especially like women in breast cancer, obviously, this podcast is about breast cancer, but for anyone, but my friends out there, anybody out there who is listening to this, making sure that you are creating those boundaries and thinking to yourself, are you doing too much for people? Are you a people pleaser? Is that your identity to be able to take on everyone else's problems or do as much as you can for other people? You're the glue that holds the family together. You're always the one who hosts dinners for the family and cleaning up and doing all this stuff. I think it's really important for us to be able to create those boundaries and get help from other people and be choosy about what you're going to do with your life and is it creating stress. And so I just thank you for saying that because
Yeah,
so many of us don't really understand that
yeah,
at all.
yeah. And we do what we do for a very good reason. Nothing's broken here. It's when we understand, when you know thyself, when you understand how you became you, why you do what you do, then there's huge power in that awareness that can become to see, okay, this is why I struggle to say no, or this is why I put myself last all the time. This is why I caretake everyone in the whole world. When you understand the reasons for that, with that awareness now comes choice, and you can start to circuit break these behaviors, and you can start the process of breaking the habit of being you. It's very hard to do because we're learnt behaviors. Everything we do, all our behavioral traits, these are adaptations and coping strategies from earlier experiences in our life. Some of the good stuff, some of the bad stuff, we learned from it, we adapted, we coped, and what worked, we kept, and we kept doing it. Now the problem is sometimes it shows up later in life. And then to unlearn that, especially when we've been doing it for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, we're really good at it. Yeah. We're really good at being us. So to unlearn that and to circuit break these behaviors and then inject new behaviors is really tricky. Hey. And so it's a process, and you're going to fail sometimes miserably, and sometimes you're going to keep goals amazingly. But it's just about consistently showing up for yourself and noticing what you're doing, circuit breaking it, trying our best to inject a different choice in that moment. And then slowly over time, we start to dilute out of us and our psyche and our way of being all these old behaviors. And we can literally recreate ourselves. And that's a very, very important thing to do, especially when there's these traits that aren't serving us anymore.
Right. And not feel bad about it.
Mm,
I have all of a sudden in my life, I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel bad about saying no. I
mm.
don't feel like I have to explain myself all the time. It's hard sometimes, but I know you have some clients coming up here. So I want to finish off with a couple little pieces before we go. And one is you really taught me a lot about nutrition more than I'd known a lot about nutrition, but you really helped me get through some of the treatments and things like that. I since have gone really not all 100% yet, but almost plant-based, and I love it. It's just feels good for my body. So I want to talk about a little bit about diet and exercise. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so diet, first off, there's so many diets out there. You start to pop into Google cancer diet and just watch how many results you get. And everyone's saying that this is the best way to do. It's carnivore, it's keto, it's plant-based, it's veganism, it's this, it's that. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And I've had people thrive on many different sorts of diets, but there are some sort of underlying themes, I suppose, which will benefit anybody looking to improve their health or facilitate healing. I tend to lean a little bit more towards plant-based style of eating. Now, there's two very different ways to have a look at diet. There's interventions, which are short-term aggressive interventions and aren't designed to be a diet. Now, a diet comes from the word dieta, which means way of life. It's how we eat. It's how we do life all the time. And so it's like the Mediterranean style of eating, or it might be veganism. It's a way of life. It's a way of consistently eating. Whereas a dietary intervention is short term. It might just be for the duration of, let's say, chemotherapy to enhance chemotherapy outcomes. And there can be some very aggressive styles, which might be some cycling of low protein to high protein diets. I commonly do a style of dietary intervention called methionine restriction, which is a cycle diet to help enhance chemotherapy outcomes. But when it comes to a broader diet way of life, there's some sort of hallmarks that everyone will benefit from. One is, I'm never going to say don't get more plants in your diet, more fruits, more vegetables. Lots of healthy fats are very important. So looking at things like avocados and nuts and seeds and beautiful olive oil in your food, a small amount of coconut products. These are very important for the body. Typically, I recommend a lower grain consumption in the diet. I think a lot of Western diets can be very heavy on grain, and the nutritional benefits of having too much in that, I don't think are there. So a small amount of grain in the diet is okay, but we don't want it to be the basis of the diet. We really want the beautiful plant foods, anything that grows in nature, to be the predominant of the diet. Lots of fats in there. And if we are eating animal products, then it's the quality of the animal that we eat. So how was that animal raised? Was it raised on its natural food source? Is it pasture fed, pasture finished, as opposed to, let's say, beef, cow that's been raised in a factory farm on grain, which isn't what it eats? It changes the chemistry of the animal, of the meat on the animal, the muscle, which is what we consume if we're eating animals. And so depending on the health of that animal, depending on the health of us, we're part of the food chain. You are what you eat. We all say it. So if we are eating animal protein, small amount, we don't need massive amounts of it, but quality in there. So, more plants, lots of fats. If you're eating animal protein, quality animals, low grain residue in the diet, a little bit of pulses and legumes, those sorts of food, a small amount of that as well. So that's general sort of guidelines for just general health and healing.
You have some great resources on nutrition, and you did send me some documents on. I never can pronounce it, Eddie.
Yeah.
Methionine is
Nobody can. Methionine. Yeah. Yeah.
methionine diet. So I actually
Yes,
did try that during chemo. And I will say during chemo, it's really difficult to even want to eat anything. And it's like
it is.
sometimes you don't feel like having something, it doesn't taste good or whatever. But I
Yeah.
bought all of that stuff and my dad helped me with it. And so I would do that before the chemo, after the chemo, whatever the steps. And then you recommended some supplements. So I took the supplements as well. And I followed that. So anyone who has been diagnosed with cancer or whatever, reaching out to Eddie would be a really good resource for you. He is just full of knowledge and he's walked the walk. He's done the research. He's really been amazing for me and my knowledge. And I did follow a lot of what you said. And I just never will forget you. What do you think about exercise? I feel like exercise is a good thing. Like I walked during my chemo week,
Yeah.
I walked
Yeah.
with my husband. It was not easy, but we walked around the block with the dogs every single time. Tried to get my heart rate up. It
Yeah.
was not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, the more and more research is coming out on exercise, and oncologists these days, they used to poo-poo exercise, dietary interventions, all these things. None of it makes a difference back in the day. But Now you've got most oncologists are going to be pretty confident saying, listen, you need to exercise. Things that get your bigger muscle groups under your thighs and also your arms moving. We know that obviously when you start moving, you start to breathe a bit deeper, which helps with oxygenation in the body. It helps with decreasing inflammation, and it helps to release endorphins, which just perk you up and make you feel a little bit better. It gets the blood rushing, which is fantastic. But also what happens when you start to move the big muscle groups is that they produce these chemicals called myokines, which actually act as tumor suppressors, which means to slow tumor growth. So who doesn't want that? If it's something
Right.
that's as simple as going for a small walk. And with exercise too, it's meeting the person where they're at. For some people, just to go out and walk to their letterbox and back 3 times is enough exercise for them if they're really depleted and really riddled with chemotherapy side effects, or they're just very weak. That might be enough exercise. But for some people, that might be in a different state of health. It might be that 1 kilometer walk around the block with the dog. For some people, they might get some resistance bands and do a little bit of resistance training, or even a couple of cans of baked beans, something just to put a little bit of stress onto the muscles. You're always going to get some great benefit. And I look at it as medicine, and it's free, and you can give
Yes.
yourself a daily dose. And if you do it, it does also decrease your side effects of traditional oncology treatment. So starting, if you are early in the journey, starting before you even start your treatments and then trying to maintain that all the way through, you will get a lower side effect profile.
Very good. Yeah, I actually felt good. I told my husband, even if I say that I don't want to do it, get me out there and let's do it. And we did it every single time. I did everything as much as possible. And it's very bizarre to think that it was a whole year ago that I started this chemo, and it just has come full circle. And me reaching out to you again and letting you know about this podcast. And I just really appreciate your being on this show. I feel honored to know you, and anyone who is listening to this, please reach out to Eddie. He is just a wealth of knowledge, and he has a very soothing voice. And so he's a really good therapist. At least I thought so. Very soothing voice. And I just,
It's the microphone. It's the microphone.
it is. No, I don't even think you were talking on a microphone when I was talking to you before, and you really calmed
No, I
me down,
wasn't.
and
No.
you did. I'm not just saying this, you really did bring me out of the darkness and made me realize, okay, I can do this. And I did it, Eddie. And I know that anyone who reaches out to you to get advice from you, obtain your services, whatever it is, in the show notes, I do have resources that you have provided. You've provided a couple of ebooks, your contact information. And once again, thank you for dealing with all of this technology issues. And I'm glad that we were able to make this work. And maybe at some point we can get back on and talk supplements and things like that. I'll reach
Absolutely.
out to you. I know you have a client, a lucky client of yours waiting for you. And so thank you again, Eddie. And we will see my audience next time on Test Those Breaths.